And as you know tonight that we are having a presentation regarding the future of libraries and the library master plan. And I'm sure that you all knew that, and you're coming out to hear as well as we are excited about learning what the study has in store for East Gwillimbury.
The Library Board has worked very hard on creating a draft master plan for charting the way. We've spent a lot of time talking in this chamber about growth and managing it and where the direction of the town is going. And I think that the draft master plan that we have before us certainly puts us in lockstep with some of the plans that we've been making here at the town. And I'm excited to share some of the work that the board has been doing. We have I think we have virtually all of our board trustees, as well as some of our friends of the library, including some of our staff from the East Gwillimbury Public Library. So that's really exciting. Thank you to all of you for coming tonight. And so what I'll do is I will pass the microphone over to Michelle Allen, who will get things started for us.
Good evening, Madam Mayor, members of council. Last year, the library retained the services of Dysart Jones and Associates to review and update our master plan. The revised plan, once it's complete, will address our future facility, technology, staffing, and potential budget implications, and help the library prepare to meet the future needs of our community. Tonight, I would like to introduce Rebecca Jones, a librarian, a former corporate and academic manager, with considerable expertise in management, long-term and operational planning, service design, and organizational restructuring. Also presenting tonight is Ken Roberts, who was formerly the chief librarian of the Hamilton Public Library for over 18 years. He is a recipient of numerous achievement awards in the field of library science, and he has recently co-authored a research paper on public library information technology and models of service. He has recently been appointed to the Royal Society of Canada's Expert Panel Commission on holding a national conversation on the future of libraries. So with your permission, at this time, I will turn the floor over to Rebecca and to Ken.
Not Rebecca, I'm Ken, just in case you're wondering. And I have to say, it was a pleasure to work with the staff and the board of the East Gwillimbury Public Library System. We had a great time doing it. We learned a lot, and a lot, I think, even of assumptions that you'd make about a sort of urban, suburban, rural community were shattered in many ways. The technology backbone, lots of the services that the library system provided, we found them to be exceptionally good, and we're really quite excited by what it was that we found here, particularly in a number of different areas, and we'll kind of go over those. It was a great opportunity to work with a community that is going through that element of growth, because I think that there's so many exciting things that you can do to manage that, not just with facilities, but with staff and with planning ahead, that we were quite excited by working on the project. And I always like working with Rebecca, so it was an enjoyable task because I got to work with her as well. One of my responsibilities was, because libraries are undergoing so much change, over the last few years, I've been sort of part of an international group of futurists that have been working with libraries to track what has been happening to libraries worldwide, to track the ways that libraries are dealing with a lot of technology changes, and to sort of suggest ways in which libraries might want to address some of the challenges that they're facing by the rapidly changing nature of technology inside public libraries. So I've kind of distilled those down into trends that are happening worldwide in terms of libraries, so that we could bring those to the attention of the East Gwillimbury Library Board and say, these are trends that are happening, how would you like to deal with some of those? So we'll just go over some of those trends and then the recommendations that we have in the report itself. I should mention that down at the bottom where it says kroberts.ca, that's my website. By noon tomorrow, because we did make some changes just before the meeting, we will have a PDF of all of the slides that are up there. So anybody in the audience or anybody on council that would like to go there, you'll see where it says reports and presentations, and the East Gwillimbury slides that we do tonight will be on that website, and you can download it as a PDF if you'd like. So the next slide. Somebody have control of that? Or do I have control of it? I do, okay. Wow, okay. One of the main questions that we get asked a lot about is ebooks. And I've been responsible for the Canadian Urban Libraries Council task force that's been dealing with ebooks on the last few years. And the one thing we can say, and when I talk to members of the public, is a lot of people say, I'll never read ebooks. I like the, the book with the cover and the paper, and that's a real book. An ebook is not a real book. But the economics of publishing is going to change that nature. A few years ago, there were 1,400 bookstores in Canada. They had their own separate Canadian Booksellers Association. Today, the number of bookstores has diminished enormously and is expected to continue going down. Even if you look in Toronto, the world's biggest bookstore, a number of the other bookstores that have disappeared in Toronto are continuing to disappear. And the Canadian Booksellers Association doesn't even exist anymore. They're now part of the Retail Council of Canada. So publishers are losing places where they can sell books. And the net result is that bestsellers have plenty of places where they can be sold. Even places such as Costco or Walmart are becoming major retailers of books, but only a narrow range of titles. But publishers, and particularly Canadian publishers, are trying to make sure that there's a broad range of titles. And the only way they can really ensure that and ensure that the public has access to them is by moving to ebook content. And the other thing that they're finding is, so that's part of the Canadian economics that deals with it. And in the past, literary fiction, first novels, have always been money losers for publishers. And at one time, a typical Canadian print run for any mid-list type of a fiction. So that's one where it's not really a bestseller, but it's an author that you'd probably know something about and had heard their name. They would do, during the course of their print run, around 7,000 copies. And you need 5,000 copies to break even in that type of a market. Now, the average number of sales that they're doing in print is less than 3,000 copies. So the economics of publishing are going to insist that more and more titles are moving to an ebook format. And that would mean that if a public library wants to provide access to a wide range of material, then the users of that public library will be using ebooks in an increasing number and an increasing fashion. And that has an impact on services. It doesn't always mean that there's fewer staff or less space, particularly in a growing community, because there'll be more people coming in for lots of the book content. And we'll go over the other ways in which a lot of that space is being used instead of for direct circulation of many of the materials in the books. But in some libraries, such as San Antonio, Texas, or the suburban area of San Antonio, Texas, they are actually, people bring in their readers and the staff will load the books onto them, or they have hundreds of ebook readers that they loan to the members of the public who don't have readers of their own. So, and people that sort of doubt that these changes will take place, all you have to do is look back 10 or 15 years and remember reference books. Reference books, when you go into the library and ask a reference question of a librarian, that was the way in which most sort of small bits of information, bites of information, were transferred from one person to another. As you'd go to the library and ask them who was the American League batting champion in 1988 or whatever it was. But now you just go online and find that in some type of a search. So reference books that used to exist 15 years ago and used to consume up to a quarter of a library's materials budgets, they don't even exist anymore. So lots of those formats have changed in the past and they'll continue to change. So I like to compare the electronic publishing to the development of the automobile. The first forms of the automobile were called a horseless carriage because people had to remember the past. Well, it was a carriage, but it didn't have a horse. Well, we're doing the same thing with ebooks, It's a book, but it's electronic. So we'll call it an ebook because then it tells people what it actually is. It's a book, but electronic. But what happened with that next generation of the horseless carriage is suddenly they put a windshield in because it was going faster. They put rubber tires on because it was going faster. They improved the roads. They put a radio in, and suddenly it began to change the ways in which transportation happened, business occurred, and many different types of things happened. And that next generation was no longer a horseless carriage. It was a new creation. It was an automobile. So the same thing is happening with ebooks, and that's a whole other talk that we can go into, is right now the ebook really is a book that was designed for print, but is also distributed in electronic format. But increasingly what we're beginning to see is books that are designed for the electronic format. Still include reading, but for example, a medical book, instead of it becoming out of date as a printed book would become, you would still subscribe to that as a book, but you would get automatic updates that would ensure that the medical information that's included in that book and in a book format is constantly updated. So what will change? Everything, the container, the content, the industry itself, the way it distributes material, and the relationship with the reader, because suddenly if that material is updated on a constant basis, and I love the sort of picture because it's an example of one application that's out there at the present time. When I was a boy, I loved astronomy. The only Christmas present I kept from when I was a boy was my telescope, which I still have. And I used to go out and try to figure out what the different stars and constellations are, and I tried to read all the different types of books, but could never quite figure out where they were for my part of the world. But now you can just take your cell phone out, and with a $1.99 application, it will know where you are by using the GPS inside of it. You can point it to the sky, and it tells you which constellations you're seeing and what planets are actually there. And when I go to Los Angeles or you go to some other place, it knows that you're in a different center of the world and can keep track of that as well. And that's kind of an example of what we're going to see with books, where they are using other aspects of it, not just to create more knowledge by knowing where you are and what it is that you're interested in. The other shift that we're seeing is a shift in public libraries from public coming to you for information to public coming to you for imaginative literature and for imaginative creations. One of the shifts or changes that's happened over the last 20 or 30 years really is, and one thing that has been enormously beneficial to libraries, is that sort of baby boomer love of fiction. When I first started as a librarian, a normal library system would circulate someplace around 2 to 3 items per year that were in some form of adult fiction. Now, a library system will circulate 6 or 7 items per year that are some form of adult fiction, which is 3 times higher than what it used to be. And in fact, when I started as a librarian, your average library system would only circulate about 6.5 items per year, and then you would decide per person. And they would think that that was a very good library system. Now you're a good library system if you're circulating 12, 13 items per year. So in fact, the public's interest in coming to you for material has grown enormously, but they're not always coming to you for information. They're coming to you for creative material. They're feeding the imagination instead of feeding that information side of people. There's also a shift from consumption, and what I mean by consumption is a person coming to the library, taking out an item, checking it out, and taking it home and consuming it at home, to people coming to the library and expecting there to be material there that allows them to be part of that creative process. The picture that we have, and by the way, the fellow that has the earphones on and is playing the guitar is a good friend of mine, David Premi, who's an architect. And we were in Copenhagen, and this is in the Copenhagen Main Library, where they just had a wide spot inside of one of the corridors and a number of electronic instruments, and people were just welcome to pick them up and start playing them. And you could, if you wanted to, by listening to the earphones, the woman that is playing the keyboard was actually Danish, and she recognized the fact that David's a very good guitar player, and she talked to David. They agreed upon what they'd play together and flipped a couple of switches so they could hear each other, and then they started playing together, and eventually another person came along and began to play one of the other instruments as well, all without any element of programming, where it wasn't where staff said between noon and 2 o'clock on a Saturday afternoon you can come and play the musical instruments that exist inside the library. Instead, they're permanently there, and people would just pick them up and use them as they became available. And you'll see throughout the presentation there's a number of other ways in which people are using libraries to sort of feed their own creation. Whether it's they go to the library because they're interested in publishing their own books and materials, and so they want assistance with the software that allows them to do that, and the editors and the creators, or whether they're trying to put together a family history, and so they go to the library because they can help them to scan the material. And in many instances, for example, in the Delft Public Library in the Netherlands, where when you scan the material, the library receives copies of it as well, and it starts being attached to homes and households as part of the family histories of the people that live in that area, and you begin to build this huge database of members of your own community, and those family histories become something that is part of the library itself, where it is building that knowledge about what the community has been and what it's emerging and will become into the future. So the other thing that we're moving then is from individual consumption of materials. So that's that idea of people taking out material and taking it at home or taking it to the beach in Mexico or wherever they may go, and instead moving towards collaboration. And in fact, the East Gwillimbury Public Library is a very good example of this, where many people within the community of East Gwillimbury struggle with their bandwidth speeds for their internet connections, whether they're on a wired or a Wi-Fi type of a connection. And the library in the municipality has much faster bandwidth than most people are likely to have at home. And that's what libraries are doing, is they're offering considerably better access to technology than people have in their homes, so that they can teleconference, so that they can telework, so that they can manage to download materials or collaborate or work with other people on projects. School boards are increasingly requiring group study and requiring people to work together and use the technologies, and libraries are becoming the place where you can come together and use that technology and share it back and forth and be able to advance and become better in those schools because of the use of good technology inside the library, which is where some of those space needs are not necessarily devoted to the concept of the past library of being stacks waiting for people to use the material, but there are live spaces where people actually come and collaborate and use the technologies that are available to them. We commonly comment upon is that what libraries are finding is that people really respond to quality spaces, is that if the space looks like something in which the community can take pride and say, this is my town, this is something that I'm very proud of, then the numbers of people that actually go in and use that library grow exponentially. The quality space really pulls people in. So what we do say is that when you're faced with budget pressures, sometimes it's best to reduce size before you reduce the quality of space. The other aspect of this is that it does not necessarily mean that it's more expensive. It just means that part of the design process, you're making sure that the architects and the designers that are involved in it know that quality and a good look is something that you're trying to achieve. As an example, in the opening slide, and you'll see it again, I think, is the closing slide, a library building that I did that just has glass on the exterior of it, but we did LED lighting that can dance and can do lots of different things in the evening, and we can project artwork onto the walls of that library at nighttime. And that really did not cost hardly anything, but because we're located next to what used to be Copps Coliseum and is now First Ontario Center, I have to remember that one, every time people left those concerts and went back to their cars, they would see projected art on the side of the libraries and see the LED lights, and you could hear them say, there's a place I need to come back downtown in order to visit that library. But it wasn't expensive, and in fact it saved money because it meant that we were able to light the perimeter of the building but turn off the lights inside the building instead of keeping the lights on inside the building so that there was not a darkened downtown. And it actually meant that you were saving money but adding the look of quality to that particular space. So when we say make sure that quality is part of the design, it does not necessarily mean that what we're saying to you is that it needs to be a more expensive design. You can do it in the same cost. It's just that as part of that architectural parameter, you have to insist that quality is part of what you're requesting. By the way, I'm going to go back to that slide. The one on the left-hand side is the Vancouver Public Library with lots of community space and shops that are inside of it. The one on the right-hand side is in the Malmö, Sweden library, which is one of the most beautiful libraries I've ever seen. All of those bookshelves that are on the lower level are actually on casters, and they're lockable and can be moved away. And they use that as their primary programming space and do these author readings that are astonishing with hundreds and hundreds of people inside that space as they move away those shelving units that are on the casters. And those are individual study or group collaboration spaces that you can sort of see on that wall that's on the left-hand side of the Malmö, Sweden one. I sort of thought of it as the Hollywood Squares wall that was actually there, and you can see the reason for that. But the other thing that we're beginning to see is much more, and you can expect this, of a service orientation. I visited 23 libraries in Europe about a year and a half ago, and not once did we see one single service desk where the staff member was on one side and the customer was on the other side. On each and every one of those occasions, the customer was looking at the same screen that the staff member was looking at. And what we were seeing was a distinct service orientation. In fact, that staff member didn't have just one desk that they were assigned to. There would be within the area that they were working a number of different service points. And almost like signing off if you were in a Home Depot where you'd sign off the screen, but if you're with the customer, you just go to the nearest one of those screens, very quickly sign on, often with just an access card, and be able to help the customer from there. The other thing that we're seeing is users taking control. And you can see this a lot. And I think it's one of the things that sometimes that on an unconscious level affects staff because they don't quite get it sometimes, is that we've seen it in the past where the users have begun to take control of customer-placed holds. At one time in libraries, when the customers filled out the little form to place a hold on a book or on an item, only 2% of the circulations really were going through that sort of customer-placed holds process. Now, where that process is completely automated and it can be done online, up to 25 to 30% of a library's circulation is done by user-placed holds. And the users love it because it means that they can place the hold, receive an electronic notification that the item is available, and then go to the library and receive exactly the item that they were hoping to receive and know that it's there for them. And it sometimes is a little more work on the back end for the library, but the customer satisfaction is enormous. So we're seeing customer reviews being placed on the catalogs. We're seeing customers checking out their own material, checking in their own material. We're seeing those e-books where the customer is in complete control because they go to your website, find the item, check it out, check it back in, and it's never touched by a staff hand except for that back-end electronic technological aspect of it. But what we're seeing increasingly is customers taking control in other areas where there's a lot more customer planning of programs and conducting of programs without necessarily a lot of staff intervention. There's customers working on the website where if there was a customer who is exceptionally good with and does great things with comic books or with manga or young adult fiction, then they're the ones that write the blogs for those areas and it can be shared in the websites on a number of different libraries. You can see the customers sometimes with maker spaces and fab labs, which we'll talk about a little bit, where the customers are actually helping to operate and run those types of areas. The other thing, and we make this point repeatedly, is that when you talk to people and you mention the library, what the normal reaction is a great deal of nostalgia, where people go, oh, the library's about books. I just love that. I love books. I love the smell of books. I love the touch of books. Library, that's what a library is about, is books. And of course we are. We are about books. But we've also changed a lot, where it is about making sure you're connecting people with information or creative material that they actually need, no matter what the format may be. So in order to convince people that you've changed, if they haven't set foot in you for a long time, it means that what you really need is a strong street presence for that library system itself. And you need to have in that window space those services that are sort of promoting the fact that you are changing. Now, this is one of my library buildings, and you can see it's got the LED lights that are on the front. And it's a much larger library, but the main floor is no larger than one of your libraries would be, the part that's actually lit with the colors themselves. And you can see even in through the windows that that kind of Wi-Fi area where people can sit there with their laptops is visible through the window. What you can't see a little bit more on the right area is that's one of the computer areas where people can use computers and use them collaboratively. So those are the areas that we're stressing in the window space, so that when people drive by, that they have a better sense of what goes on inside the building. Because if they are driving by and just seeing something that says library without a strong street presence, they don't really have the sense of what goes on inside the building itself or why they might want to go there with their children. So these are examples of libraries that have a strong street presence. I love the Salt Lake City Library. It's probably my favorite library in the entire world. And it has this huge big bank of glass. It's done by the same person who did the Vancouver Public Library that was in the earlier slide. And the lower one, which is in Cambridge, Ontario, and that's not a very large library. It's about 10,000 square feet, maybe 12. But what they've actually done is taking one of the old Carnegie buildings, one of the classic buildings, took out the windows, took out the doors, took out one wall, and encased the entire thing in glass, so that you are actually inside the Carnegie building in some areas of the inside, but they've made it much larger. And it's not a very expensive building, but it sure looks wonderful. And at nighttime, you can see the old building inside of it, inside the glass. And it's that sort of nod to the past and nod to the future at the same time that's quite dramatic. The Aarhus Denmark Library, which is a library/community center. And by the way, there's 300 people in the region of Aarhus in Denmark. And this one is 300,000 square feet. So it's 1 square foot for absolutely every individual. So that's the importance that they're placing on this. This building won't be completed until next fall. I have never seen that type of a ratio of library space to population. It's quite remarkable. But they've taken that concept of sort of projecting art to the outside of the building to the nth degree. So the entire side of the building actually projects artwork out into the community. They came and visited our library and took that from us, and then they built on it enormously. The San Antonio Library, I'm going to do that one in contrast, because this building was only built about 6 or 7 years ago. And when I talk about a strong street presence and the fact that people can learn much more about your services just by driving by the street itself, you can see that there's the main bus stop where you stop and go to the library, the bench that's down in the corner. This is a building then without strong street presence, and the difference in terms of selling the community and letting people know what goes on inside that space is enormous. So I think that one of the things, and I mentioned that I would get back to that slide and show you the type of glass where it's not something that's expensive, but it looks elegant and looks wonderful, is that when we keep to our mission, what I really like people to keep in mind is, what do we provide? Do we sort of provide, are we the caretakers of the word, the caretakers of paper, the caretakers of the book or print? Or are we really enabling that discovery and the process discovery, not just for individuals within a community, but for entire neighborhoods and the communities themselves?
I just want to say a few other things. So I'm obviously Rebecca, and I'm actually speaking on behalf of Jim Morgenstern. Is Mark here, by the way? Mark? Hi, Mark. So Jim sends his best. So Jim Morgenstern sends his regrets. He actually lives in Nova Scotia now, has retired out there. But Jim, if you don't know, is a planner. So whereas we are librarians, Jim is a planner and has been involved in planning in most municipalities throughout Ontario and most recently the Atlantic provinces and Alberta. And so it adds a whole different dimension to our work because he looks at libraries very differently than we do. And he did work with Mark on the capital costs when we get to that. But I just want to add a few things to what Ken was talking about in terms of the library spaces, because Ken has a different viewpoint than I do as well, and much more the technology. But what we really see is that the libraries, with the space that we're going to be talking about, are using it to underpin what it is that the city or the county or township, wherever they are, really want to be focusing on. So we have libraries where small business is very important, where the township in question really wants people living and working in the same community. So what the library has done is not just, make sure that they've got the proper resources for small business, but they have the working areas for small business. So when people are working from their homes, they don't want to necessarily be working in their homes all the time. They also need meeting rooms. So the libraries supply the meeting rooms. They have the high tech for them so that they can do WebEx or Adobe Connect with people all over the world or in the next town, whatever. But then the people have no idea that they're actually living, working from their home. And in fact, I was doing some interviews with counselors today in another region who were saying to me, we've seen this happening in other libraries. We hope that you're looking at this for our libraries. Newmarket Public Library actually put in very flexible plexiglass sort of rooms that people can rent out for meetings, or they can use for working, and they can move them around. So they make them different spaces. One of the other things I was going to talk about was, the library becoming really the place for the community content. So in Library Ease, we say that we are curating the community content. That will set you all snoring, I'm sure. What that means is that nobody else is taking care of what is being created in this community. So you may have many bloggers, you may have authors, you may have various artists in the community. In fact, you may still have types of local newspapers. And although these end up being the local history, they're actually being created right now. So everybody can get the kind of content that Ken was talking about, ebooks, the stuff in the deep web, we call it, like Michelle they have many, many databases that we also call the paid-for databases, if you like. The stuff you can't get to from Google or from Yahoo or from anything. But what's really different for a library is what it does with the community stuff. So they take that and they integrate it in with, let's say the United Church is having its seed sale. They're going to be having that soon. And so they integrate that in with the content about, planting seeds that's unique to this particular area. They tell you who in the area are the experts on that. They bring together the blogs or the newspaper articles on that type of thing. See where I'm going with that? All these different types of things that Kim was talking about. Excuse me. So when we put together our recommendations, and these, as I say, I am speaking on Jim and Ken's behalf with the recommendations, it's very much rooted in what we see happening with public libraries from the community groups that we talked to and the interviews that we held, the stakeholder interviews that we held with some of you in this room, in terms of what East Gwillimbury wants to be doing. And so the slides that I'm going to be showing you are actually superimposed over Ken's. So we made this, we set his view of what's happening with public libraries, and we know what's happening with public libraries, as the context for what we are recommending for East Gwillimbury. And it's also based on the planning assumptions that you have in terms of population. So here we are. So Ken was talking about ebooks and the digital environment. And so as those containers change, so too will the way in which people use the library and in how they look at the library and how the library has to be positioned, that we want the library to be going to the people, not just the people coming to the library. And so that whole engagement has to be set up there. So we looked at not only what's changing for libraries, but what's going to be changing for East Gwillimbury. So we know that public libraries are, for most communities, seen as civic resources, that they are the one place that's seen as a real point of pride within the community that is supposed to have no bias, right? It is the place of freedom of speech, if you like, of freedom of information for people to be able to learn about, find out about whatever it is, whether it's seeds or, the seeds of some revolution, whatever it is. And so we know that that is not changing. In fact, we know that there's communities that are using the public library when they are putting in developments. They're using the public library as the anchor of the new development around it. So as a place of public gathering, where they want to be able to have debates, discussions about what's of issue and of interest to that community. This has been very popular in England and is increasingly popular in Canada. So we know that they are community and neighborhood builders, both in a physical sense, and we're going to be talking about the digital sense too. So I want you to think about that the website is no longer going to be a place that you go look at, click on, go through. That increasingly it will become a virtual experience. How many of you use Skype to talk to relatives and friends, correct? So I want you to take that and sort of magnify it by about 200,000. And you'll start to get a glimpse of, how many of you play games online? It's okay. I'll know by your eyes if you do. It's okay. Increasingly, it's our age group that's playing more games because it's getting us to understand what that virtual experience is going to be like. And it's going to augment and complement our physical spaces. So we also know that your population is set to, you are expecting that population to increase by more than 60,000 people by 2031. And we take that from both the June 2010 planning that was published as well as other conversations that we had. And we also know from our interviews, as I said, and the community groups that we talked to, that you want to engage people in the community. You want them, the new people coming here, you want them to be a part of this community. Okay. That means that what Ken was talking about, the shift from information to imagination, means that libraries are going to move from being quiet to being much more active, and from being just a place of reading to a place of experiencing. We know increasingly that in neighborhoods like this, you have people that are studying online. They may be augmenting their studies by studying online. You know about MOOCs, which are the massive online open content. They are also for a fee, but we know that people that are studying, they can study from MIT, for heaven's sake, sitting in Keswick. And it means that they need places to go to. They need that deep web information, and they need places to proctor. I was at a very small public library today, far north of here, who said they'd had 3 requests for proctoring. They didn't even know what proctoring was, but they're bloody well going to do it. Oh, I'm on tape, sorry. And so the FaceTime and the Skype are just indicators of what's going to come, and that, as I said, some of those service points are going to be physical and virtual. So that means that we are recommending that the public library be viewed as that civic building within East Gwillimbury as you are growing, and that this be reflected in the physical design and also the digital design. So the website is new. I showed you the new website, but it's going to continue to evolve. And things like, with partnerships, where the library will be seen on some of its partners' websites, web spaces, web experiences. We're going to have to move away from that site word and the library will also be connecting to other partners so that it's much more integrated. Certainly what's going to need to be considered in the design of the actual facilities, because that is why you're here, right? You want to hear about the facilities that we're recommending, is that you certainly have to take into account the location. We are, I'm about to give you some of our ideas on this location, but you're going to have to look at your own town planning and urban design policies and what you want things to be looking like, what you want the town to look like. The possible partnerships, and certainly we would say that there should always be partners. We are not strong believers in standalone libraries. We do believe that they need to be shared places, shared services, so that it's an integrated service. And of course, you want to look at the construction budget and the functionality. So we are recommending that you adopt what we call a facility classification. And believe it or not, that's not from the librarians, that's from the planner, Jim. Who has studied these throughout North America. And if we say that you have a classification system, it goes from the smallest, which is the neighborhood library, which ranges from about 5,000 to 10,000 square feet, through the community library, up to a district library, and then, of course, a central branch. And so we are not recommending a central branch for the size that East Gwillimbury is going to be. Certainly Hamilton had a central branch. But we are recommending that you have 3 facilities, a small neighborhood branch, a community branch, and a district branch. And we are also recommending, highly recommending, that no neighborhood branch is smaller than 5,000 square feet. Preferably, we'd like to see them from 8,000 to 10,000 square feet, because you're just going to need those kinds of spaces, particularly as we're talking about, more shared spaces and what's actually happening there. So we're looking at that between now and 2031, which is the date that we're looking to, that overall, so total, based on the population growth, that you will need library space of 60,000 gross square feet. Okay, so that's total. In the report, of course, we looked at what you have right now, and sort of as that population phase growth comes in, how that's going to be falling behind. So we are basing that gross square footage on a couple of things. First of all, we're grossing it on 0.7 gross square foot per capita. By the way, we were updating the master plan that was done in 2009. That master plan was 39 pages, and our update was 93 pages. Okay, we like to talk. But we gave lots and lots of details because we really want this to be a living plan that you come back to. There's a great deal of attention given to why are we recommending 0.7. The 2009 study did recommend the usual, which is 0.6, and we don't feel that that really took into account the new usage of libraries and the spaces. We have also seen libraries that are recommending and are building on 0.8 through to 1 gross square foot per capita, excuse me. And we're going conservative. So we are taking what we feel is a conservative estimate that it should be 0.7. It's not too big, but it's big enough. We're also basing it, as I said, on your population growth, and we're basing it on the fact that your physical branches will be complemented and augmented by a real digital experience. So not a website, not a chat service, but a real digital experience. The 3 physical facilities, we are recommending that the existing Mount Albert branch be the neighborhood branch, so that is, should remain to serve the east area. And then we're looking at a new branch, would in fact be a district branch, but it would be phased in. And it would be in the west, for the west central area, which is sort of Queensville, we are guessing at. We are guesstimating. And again, I go back to that other recommendation that said you really need to look at the exact location. But we're looking at west central, plus that serves your rural area. So we did not want to lose sight of that. So phase 1 would be when you have population reaching 36,000, and phase 2 would be when you're reaching 86,000. There'd also be another new branch, which is a community size, as you can see in the bottom there, which is about 15,000 square feet. And that would be when you are reaching a 67,000 population. It would be in the southeast area, sort of around Holland Landing, Sharon, Green Lane. Again, you'd have to determine where exactly you want it to be, but it would replace the Holland Landing branch. So the estimates, which are in line with, this has been discussed with Mark, the estimates for the capital cost, and these are estimates, okay, for 2014 through to 2031 would be about $25 million, but that is excluding the land purchase. And we're recommending that a study be initiated as soon as possible, so in 2014, so that you can define the exact locations, get the land, and confirm your capital costs, particularly for phase 1 of that West Central District Library, which, as I said, would be 20,000 square feet. Do you want me to continue on in terms of the technology? So we also looked at the technology and the staffing, as Michelle said, and we looked at sort of very broad brush around the finance and the capital costs. But in terms of the technology, we were, I don't know if you caught it at the beginning, but Ken said that this is a leading library in terms of the technology. We were very impressed with what this library, the staff, do with what you have. You have great technology. Your website does need to be upgraded, and it needs to be upgraded so that it becomes the launch pad for that digital experience. There's certain operational technology improvements that need to be looked at as well. And staff certainly want to become much more comfortable and confident with technologies. This is certainly the way that all libraries are going, and they want to be able to feel that they have that comfort level when anybody comes in with any device. And we see this all over. And it's not just the devices, it's the actual digital information. So it's integrating what's in those deep web databases, okay, not the Google, not the Yahoo, but the deep web, to be able to integrate that into what people are really doing so that they know that it's there. We know that those databases across Ontario are terribly underutilized. And that speaks to both, the marketing issue of it, but also the comfort level for staff in using them. And we're also recommending that you investigate what's called the RFID technology. So that allows self-service. Certainly Kingston Frontenac Public Library, which is going through its own growing pains. It has both a really large rural area with many small, tiny libraries, and of course it has Kingston, which, some of the biggest employers at Kingston have been shut down. So it has a downtown library with a lot of issues and a lot of different things happening in its space. They've actually gone to the first handheld checkout things. So staff just have them. They're like an app on your phone. So checkout can be done anywhere at any time. Anything else you want to add there? Okay. And last but not least, I just want to speak to the staff, who we were so impressed with the collaboration and the just the atmosphere of the staff within. And we're not just saying that to you. We wouldn't say it if it wasn't true. We don't always say this. Ken started out by saying that that we did really enjoy this project. We don't always enjoy projects. I'll tell you that right now. But we did enjoy this one, and a lot of it was because the staff they're quite incredible. And you certainly hear that from the community when you go out and talk with them. We are recommending that you will need a 0.6 FTE full-time equivalent per 1,000 residents. That is echoing what was recommended in 2009. So although we are disagreeing with the 0.6 gross square footage, we are agreeing with the full-time equivalent. And when the digital branch facility experience, if you like, is phased in, it will have to be staffed and budgeted and managed in exactly the same way that the physical branches are, because they will complement each other. They will work together. In fact, they can start to do that right now. I was just in libraries today, little tiny ones, as I said, and I said, why don't we just have, monitors up so you can see each other? There's no reason why you can't have WebEx running all day. It doesn't pull a lot of bandwidth, and you can actually see each other. And you can see the patrons in the other smaller libraries. This can start right away. And last but not least, I think, was the fact that, yes, there is some consideration to be done in terms of how the organization is actually organized, if you like, the infrastructure, not just of the buildings, but how people are working together, what they're actually working on. As you grow, roles change, competencies change. So as you're building the staff's comfort, you're also building their competencies with technologies, with the digital world, with what people are doing. In fact, we know that more and more library staff are not in the library. If they're in the library, there's something wrong. They are out working with the community, and that requires very different roles. So we're recommending that you have a look at that. And believe it or not, I'm finished talking. I've never done this before, so I'm assuming you're going to ask lots of questions. My name's Jim Morgenstern.
Slash. Wow, that's tremendous. That's been, I didn't exactly check the time, but I would say we are at least 40 or 45 minutes of amazing information for us to consider and for our community to really think about, and for all of us to come up to speed with libraries. We all think that we've been in new libraries and new things that we see and new technology, and many people say, where are we going? Maybe we don't even need libraries in the future. And so this is an incredible amount of material, and I know for myself, certainly has me thinking bigger and broader of libraries than ever before. It's just terrific. I have questions, but I will ask of members of council before and perhaps mine will be answered by the time we get to that. Councillor Johnson.
Well, thank you very much. Through you, Madam Mayor, it was a very interesting presentation. I enjoyed it. I did mark a couple of things down. I liked where you said it's the discovery and the processes of discovery. Because I feel that way when I go into the library, or when I open up a book, or when I research something on the internet. I always think this is just incredible that I can go out there and find that. Which brought me to a question, and you mentioned it 2 or 3 times, about the deep web or the paid web that you have. I didn't know that, so I'd like to know. I think maybe the viewing audience wouldn't know about that either. What can you help me with if I come into the library and I mean, you can pick the topic. I won't pick the topic. What can you help me with that I had no idea I would be able to find in the library or through the library?
Okay. And I think that, I mean, the deep web really is the part of the web that you don't see if you're just going on and doing a normal type of a Google search.
Well, you
It's
can't.
You can't
You
see
can't
it.
get to it.
So it's the material that you would have rights or access to that you would be able to see, but nobody else, if they're just doing a general search, would be able to see it themselves. Right now, one of the issues with the deep web is that it's too difficult for people that actually have rights, because you as a member of a community that has databases, so there'd be thousands of magazines, lots of Harvard Business Review articles, many articles that would deal with human resources, with waste management, with municipal planning, with lots of that. We have lots of that material that the library actually subscribes to and that we receive online that are coming to us from a web provider in different types of countries, wherever we're getting that material from. And East Gwillimbury gets much of that material too. But despite the fact that you probably already have a right to access that material, there are too many barriers in the way because you'd have to put your library card in, do a search, find the material. But increasingly, what libraries are trying to do is to make that process simpler for you to actually get to the material that you actually have a right to receive. And then eventually what we would be hoping is that your search of the web would include the general information that everybody has a right to. But as a member of a community that has licensed certain material for everybody in that community, you would be able to go deeper and give you better, good adjudicated information, peer-reviewed journal articles, lots of information that you would not have access to at the present time.
Right.
Is that-
And Madam Mayor, through you, so that's available right now.
I'll give you a perfect example of, anybody here try to fix their own cars? So the children repair manuals
Yes.
are on. So that's,
Okay,
I mean, that's a really obvious thing.
Yeah.
But, and there are some libraries that actually set up, alerts for their counselors on various
Yeah.
planning issues that come up in those journals, in that type of thing. The problem is, quite frankly, that the publishers, this stuff is ugly, okay? It doesn't look visually appealing, and you have to kind of know what you're doing.
Better all the time.
Yes? True.
So the Chilton repair manuals are there, so if I wanted to know the setting of some particular year car's
Your
points or
1972
whatever,
Corvette, you
I
can
can
get
commit.
that.
Good, thank you very much. That answers my question.
Another example would be my own son's life was saved as a result of information from the deep web. So it was an unpublished, peer-reviewed medical journal article, and his medical condition, there was no known cure for it. Everybody who'd had the condition died before him. And then the research was not yet published, but was available on the deep web. The doctor found it, and I found it as well. And his life was saved. He was the 9th person in the world whose life was saved as a result of it. So that's the value of having access to the deep web.
Questions? Councillor Eaton?
First off, thank you very much for the presentation. I did enjoy being part of the process and going through the interviewing with some of my thoughts. I think what you've presented tonight ties in with what we had a fairly lengthy discussion at council today, and that's with regards to broadband and how do we get it to large businesses. But I think what the library provides, certainly the way you're suggesting it be used as a community resource, we have a community with a Chamber of Commerce, many home-based businesses, and certainly once you get outside of the cores now and even in the future, people are on dial-up. So this gives them an excellent opportunity, rather than everybody scrambling around trying to get high-speed internet and running fiber everywhere. This certainly, and I realize that the libraries will be connected or are connected currently to a system that's much faster than we have at home. So I think using the library as a community resource at the way most businesses are going, I think is an excellent use of not only physical space, but of the resources.
Now, as part of this process, we were able to read the York Region Information Network report on bandwidth that included the East Gwillimbury. So we saw the plans for the different speeds in the different types of areas. And I think that's an excellent plan, and it's being exceptionally well managed. But at the same time, the library would be at the high end of that so that any resident that lived in the rural area would have access to a greater bandwidth. You're correct.
Yeah. Can I just add something? Are we just like Huey and Dewey? In England, where I don't know if you're aware of this or not, but they have been closing a great many libraries because, of course, they're under huge budget pressures. But 6 libraries that they set up to specifically, not that they set up, but they positioned them to specifically work with home-based businesses and small businesses. And the way that they are measuring their success is the number of businesses that are still in business after 2 years that are, actively using the library, where the library is there and is a part of it, and they're using the library for their meeting rooms, et cetera. And they're being very successful. So it speaks to that as well.
And what some libraries are doing is working with the municipality and with economic development so that there is an assignment of a library staff member to new startup business entrepreneurs, home-based businesses, that can then teach them how to access the deep web materials and other materials that would be appropriate for their business.
Councillor Morton?
It's more comments than they are questions, but I liked your idea, Ken, when you talked about a strong street presence. I mean, our 2 branches we have now are set way back off the road. It's almost like we're saying, don't come too close because we don't want you touching us. But I liked the pictures that you had up there about where they are right on the street. We talked about, I can remember Councillor Johnson talking about when we did the Lowe's, the development over in the Lowe's Plaza, that we need a presence on the street over there of those buildings, and we did that, but we aren't doing that with our libraries. And that may entice more people to come in and use the libraries as a more comfortable and a nicer surrounding for a workplace. And as you said, with the lighting and the big windows, it will make you see within rather than looking at the cold stone of the walls that we have. I mean, not that our libraries aren't nice, but they were built to the time that they were built to
Yes,
reflect
exactly,
what the buildings were at that time. And I think as we move forward, we have to take a real serious look at our urban design plans as well when it comes to our libraries. And there's a really, really good couple of good examples up there, so thank you for that.
I'd like to ask you a couple of questions about your point in selecting new sites for libraries. And I heard you talk about the Mount Albert Library, and it should be kept as a neighborhood library, and that there should be a district branch that would be somewhat larger, probably in the Queensville area where we're expecting 30 or 40,000 people. So it will really be a city center or a town center for sure. And then you talked about replacing the Holland Landing Library and finding another location. So I'm wondering if you could just go through the steps for me on how you determine those three issues. I don't want to take a lot of time, but I think I'm trying to understand where you went with this to come up with this whole recommendation.
Three different options, because there are always different options, right? And felt that, first of all, the other options would have people driving further. And so if you go for fewer branches, you have people driving further, and you have larger branches. If you go for more branches, you increase your operating costs, because every time you have a branch, you have certain staffing costs that you can't ignore. And this was really based on where we see, based on what you've given us, the population growing. So that was the biggest thing. I don't think that there's any surprise in terms of, how we've put it together with the population, and it does cost you more to phase the district branch in what we think will be the Queensville area. But we're also basing it on how the population grows, because then that means that, if for whatever reason that next phase of population doesn't happen, you haven't sunk it all into a 40,000 square foot library. I mean, it's one of those risks that's taken. The Holland Landing branch, it was Councillor Morton that brought up about the street presence. And the Holland Landing branch, I was surprised actually when I went through that one that nobody immediately asked a question about that, because it's not what you want to hear, I know that. But you're sort of looking at, you need something around that area. It may not be Holland Landing. I mean, a feasibility study and the real growth is going to indicate that. But the Holland Landing branch, the money that would be invested, it has no street presence at all. And so the money that you would invest in renovating it would be almost as much as building a new one in another site that would have more. You want to look at your commuting patterns. You want to look at, traffic patterns, walking patterns, all those types of things. I mean, ideally, I am being taped, but ideally you want a library to be near a grocery store and a liquor store. I mean, you want it where people are, and you want it in the midst of communities, right? So did I answer your question, Mayor?
You did. I worked in a neighboring municipality, and although it didn't happen, there was a huge discussion about putting a major library branch in Upper Canada Mall.
Yes.
And
Yes.
It didn't happen, but in seeing where we're going now and street presence, et cetera, and partnerships, and real estate costs, it starts to make some sense now. It was maybe ahead of its time at that
Right.
point. But it's just, from the Holland Landing branch, and it's like any community, you have a closeness and a sense of belonging at a library, and although it's not new, it's not that old either.
I know.
And our older libraries have disappeared for that one in the, I'm going to say early 80s, which doesn't seem that long. However, I guess it's 30 years plus, and we're not today building, we're just talking about the future of replacing it down the road. So it's something that it'll be very interesting. We'll see where that all fits in time. But thank you for the explanation. Councilor Roy DiClemente.
I just wanted to add to that a little bit and to let the folks in the room know that the board had a rather lively conversation and discussion about just that point, Madam Mayor. Because, as you said, the community becomes attached to their library, and change is a difficult thing to manage sometimes. And I think that the board was surprised, but at the same time supportive of the idea that the EGPL would move to essentially a 4-branch system, which would be the 3 physical branches, and that 4th digital branch, which is just as important, I think, as the physical place. But the idea that you would, that you might have a library in a storefront, it becomes an asset to not just the retailers, but also to your residents, that they're attracted to that place because they're going there for a shopping bag, quite literally, of services. Thank you.
I should add on that point that, and I think it's a good one, you're right, that people don't like change, and they don't like it when if you're even talking about the possibility of their library closing. The best way to counter that, and I've actually closed 7 libraries, so, but what we did in each of those instances is we closed very inadequate libraries and built a superb 2, and then we would build a superb library that was open more hours, that was in that type of hub location where people would be naturally going for groceries or for other life essentials, in a certain area. But what we did too, and I think it's another reason for the phasing, is that if you build the district library first, then the people in the Holland Landing area would say, I want that kind of building. I want that building. And that street presence and the other aspects of it begin to sell itself. And the other reason I think, and you mentioned the partnerships, one reason that's very strong on the partnerships, not only is it symbiotic in terms of showing more people what a library can do and what it has to offer, if it's in there with good partners, not any partner, but good partners, is that when we deal with the 0.7, and one of the reasons it does go from 0.7 or 0.6 to 0.7 is because of the disability standards and the other expectations of libraries. At one time, the shelf, the width between the aisles in a library was 45, 46 inches. Now what they're talking about is the possibility of as much as 5 feet in some instances. I don't think it's going to come down to 5 feet, but the same thing is true in terms of the height of the material. So that top shelf that we used to use, the bottom shelf that we used to use, are probably not shelves that we'll be able to use in the library instances. But by using partners, things such as the adult changing tables or the turning radiuses and the washrooms and the number that you can use, if they're shared with other partners so that those types of services can be shared, then suddenly the cost of maintaining that type of service or the square footage that's required for it can be reduced and make it more efficient. So I think those are also, when I talk about quality, you can look at the partnerships in order to reduce some of the other requirements in order to put that quality into a building at the same cost.
And if Jim were here, he would say that he would never recommend a standalone library again.
Yeah, I would agree.
So to pick the partnerships carefully, and it should be partnerships, not necessarily always a recreation center. As we say, that's so 1970s. I mean,
Still works.
it does make sense in a lot of cases. It depends on the neighborhood that you are trying to create. So you may, in fact, with schools, is really rewarding for everybody, with the various service agencies, with small business, whatever it is, but to certainly look at those partnerships.
And I think for us, we have the advantage of a growing community, that there will be many new facilities being built, and they all come to our door for a building permit and ideas of how they're going to build and where they're going to build. I know that we will have probably 8 to 10 new elementary schools, and I would expect probably 3 high schools, maybe more. And when they are already public facilities, it makes perfect sense to think about those people, particularly when the infrastructure is already in place and it's adding on. And again, you've got a hub of people that are a built-in community in itself with school or education facilities. So I know we'll have lots of opportunities for partnership, probably to the point that we'll have choices for that. And I think that's very exciting for us as well as we move forward. Councillor Johnson.
Yes, I have to make a comment further about the replacing of the Holland Landing Library, keeping the Mount Albert branch, and maybe where population is 5,000 people, give or take a few, in that area, and then in Holland Landing it's 10,000. Your recommendation is speaking about when we reach 67,280 people, so that's a long way off. So I realize we're not making a decision tonight to do that, and we wouldn't want anybody at home or in the viewing audience to think that we were making that decision. But certainly when we reach 67,280 people, we'll be thinking about other things. And by then, this, I'm not sure, 4,000 square foot library will already be open in the Queensville area, and perhaps that'll end up being in the southern Queensville area, very easily reachable by Holland Landing residents, or just as easily reachable as the one is that's there right now. So it's a long time off, and it's at least a tripling, if not more, of the population that we already have in East Gwillimbury before we have to deal with it.
Are there any other questions? I'd like to thank you so much for being here tonight. It's been so informative for all of us, and we decided to tape it because we thought that it was really important for those that aren't here tonight to have a chance to hear about the exciting report that you've brought forward to us, and a future clip of where libraries are going, and specifically what we're looking at long-term for East Gwillimbury. So it's an opportunity. It'll be on the website, and hopefully that people who are not here tonight will take an opportunity to have a look at it and see where it's going. So I know that you've done a tremendous amount of work, and want to thank you very much on behalf of all members of council. Thank you.
Thank you.
Our pleasure.
Indeed.
I have a motion moved by Councillor Eaton, seconded by Councillor Johnson. Be it resolved that the presentation from Kay Roberts and East Gwillimbury Public Library staff in order to discuss the future of libraries and the library master plan be received. All those in favor? Do you have a question? I'm sorry, I called the question, but go ahead.
Well,
I won't take the call.
I wonder if we might be in a position to endorse the draft master plan that's been presented to us, rather than just receive the information.
I'm wondering if somewhere in between, perhaps what we can do is receive it and send it to staff for a report, and they can have a look. And I'm looking particularly at Mr. Velchik, our treasurer, and Mr. Webster, our CAO, to try and land on a long-term plan that we may be able to see in the not too distant future. Mr. Webster.
Generally with master plans, we use them as a guideline, and in this case here, it's been undertaken by the library board, which is autonomous from council, does report to and ask for budget resources. In the past, what we've done with master plans, and this is actually our first master plan of the 2009 era that's been fully updated, and so we'll be filling this chambers to come with Parks and Recreation, cultural, and broadband master plans in the coming months. So I would suggest that it be endorsed in principle to be used as a guideline for future capital needs, and then that way it can inform our processes. but it's a way of moving along. I don't think staff reporting on it, Mr. Valchich has rolled up his sleeves and already met with them on it, so I don't think we could really add any value at this point with the further staff report.
Thank you very much. Councillor Eaton, you are the mover. I'm just scripting something here based on our CAO's recommendation, and that it be endorsed in principle and used for guidelines for future needs.
For future what?
Needs.
Yes, I'm fine with that.
You okay with
Yep.
that?
I would have a trouble endorsing it, just endorsing it, because I
Yes.
think there's a lot of financial implications, et cetera. But I think as a planning document, I think it's an excellent starting point.
Councillor Roy DiClemente, I know that was your request. Are you comfortable with that?
Yes, thank you, Madam Mayor and members of council.
Thank you. All those in favor? And that is carried. Thank you very much. Thank you for our public who've come out tonight. It's wonderful to have a topic where people have a keen interest and come out and view our public process. We are completed now for the evening, and we just have two more resolutions, and we will be all leaving, so if you have some comments.